The morning sun spilled across Los Angeles, washing the city in a hazy gold that made glass towers gleam like polished trophies. Inside one of those towers was Titanium Fitness Club, a place that had built its reputation as much on luxury as on sweat. Marble floors greeted clients at the entrance, scented towels lined the racks, and every wall seemed to echo with the sound of ambition. It wasn't just a gym. It was a stage for the wealthy and image-conscious, a place where sculpted bodies were put on display like art pieces. On the far side of the main floor, Ryan Carter commanded attention. At 25, he had already built himself into a kind of living advertisement for the life Titanium Fitness promised. With chiseled arms, a perfectly tanned torso, and that restless energy of someone who believed their best years were still ahead, Ryan carried himself like the star of every room he walked into. His boot camp sessions were especially popular, a blend of punishing HIIT drills and high-energy motivation that left clients breathless but exhilarated. This morning was no different. A circle of men and women, executives, actors, influencers, huffed and groaned as they pushed through Ryan's relentless sequence of squats, burpees, and sprints across the rubberized floor. Ryan clapped, shouted encouragements, and corrected form with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this rhythm for years. Every few minutes, he glanced at the mirrored walls, checking not just his client's technique, but his own reflection, making sure his image stayed as sharp as his reputation. But behind the glamorous sheen of the place, there were others moving quietly, unnoticed. At the edge of the room, near the far corner where the mirrors ended, Mr. Samuel Green pushed a mop across the floor. At 45, Samuel carried himself with a quiet, steady dignity. His dark uniform bore the Titanium Fitness logo, faded from too many washes, and his shoes squeaked faintly against the polished floor. He moved without complaint, his head slightly bowed, his focus on the streaks of water he left behind. Most of the clients barely noticed him. To them, he was part of the background, a man whose presence was functional, not memorable. But Ryan, in the middle of his high-energy performance, caught sight of him. And something about the contrast between his sweating, gasping clients and the janitor's calm, methodical movements lit a mischievous spark in his mind. As his class panted through the last round of push-ups, Ryan called for a pause. His clients leaned against their knees, dripping sweat, grateful for even 30 seconds of stillness. Ryan smirked, wiping his forehead with a towel, and let his voice carry across the polished room. "Hey Sam," he said loudly enough for the group to hear, his grin wide, his tone playful but edged with condescension. "Why don't you try this workout for fun?" A ripple of laughter spread through the circle. A few clients chuckled outright, others just smirked, their eyes darting toward Samuel as if waiting for a punchline. To them, the idea of the janitor, the man who emptied their trash cans and polished their floors, attempting the same brutal routine they had just endured, was absurd. The laughter wasn't cruel exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It was the laughter of people confident in their place above another. Samuel paused, his mop stilled in his hands. Slowly, he straightened his back, lifting his gaze from the floor to meet Ryan's eyes across the room. For a moment, the gym seemed to grow quieter, the chuckles fading into a tense anticipation. Ryan still wore that smirk, but it flickered slightly under Samuel's steady look. A look that wasn't angry, wasn't embarrassed, but something harder to place. A calmness that carried weight. And then Samuel did something no one expected. He leaned the mop against the wall, wiped his hands on his uniform pants, and nodded once. His voice, when it came, was low and even, carrying just enough for everyone to hear. "Why not?" The laughter spiked again, louder this time, almost relieved. A few clients shook their heads, amused at what they assumed was an act of bravado. Ryan chuckled too, though for a brief instant, his grin looked uncertain. He had meant it as a joke, a harmless jab, a way to entertain his clients. But now, as Samuel stepped slowly toward the workout area, it felt like something had shifted. There was no swagger in Samuel's movements, no attempt to show off. He walked with quiet assurance, his posture upright, his expression unreadable. He looked like a man answering a call, not indulging a dare. The laughter around him began to sound thinner, less certain. Ryan tossed him a mat with a playful flourish, but as Samuel placed it neatly on the floor, something in the air changed. The janitor was no longer just part of the background. He had stepped onto the stage, and everyone, whether they admitted it or not, leaned in to watch. The unexpected acceptance. The gym air felt heavier now, thick with a mix of sweat and anticipation. For the clients, this was entertainment, a moment of light-hearted spectacle between their grueling sets. But for Ryan, watching Samuel settle onto the mat with such quiet composure, something else stirred beneath his smirk. A flicker of doubt. He had thrown out a challenge meant as a joke, but the janitor hadn't laughed, hadn't brushed it off. Instead, he stood there, tall and steady, as if this was the most natural decision in the world. Samuel knelt for a moment, pressing his palms against the mat, testing its grip the way someone might test the earth before planting their feet. He took off his work jacket, folded it neatly, and placed it by the wall. Underneath, his plain black t-shirt clung lightly to his frame. It wasn't sculpted like the trainers, nor glossy like the clients, but there was a density to him, a kind of worn strength that came from years of work. The kind of body that didn't need to announce itself. Ryan clapped his hands, forcing cheer into his voice. "All right, let's start simple," he said, eyes darting around to gauge his client's amusement. He chose the plank, safe enough, but grueling for anyone who wasn't prepared. 1 minute hold, elbows on the mat, core tight. Let's see what you've got. The group lowered themselves onto the floor, forearms pressed into the rubber. Ryan followed, glancing sidelong at Samuel, expecting to see hesitation. But Samuel lowered himself smoothly, his body straight, his face calm. His breathing slowed, his eyes fixed on a spot ahead, unbothered by the chatter around him. Seconds ticked by. Ryan's clients began to shift and groan, adjusting hips, clenching teeth. 40 seconds in, one woman collapsed onto her side, gasping. Another man's back sagged dangerously. But Samuel? He held perfectly still, the line of his body unwavering, as if carved from stone. His expression remained neutral, almost meditative, like someone who had been here before, many times, and knew this was only the beginning. By the time Ryan called out, "And time!" more than half the group had broken form. Samuel, without a word, eased out of the plank, pushed himself back to his feet, and dusted his palms against his shirt. His breathing was still steady. His chest rose and fell, but it wasn't the ragged heave of the others. The chuckles in the room softened. A few people exchanged looks, small, unsettled glances that carried the same thought. That wasn't supposed to happen. Ryan pushed into the next round, quicker now, his confidence itching for reassurance. "All right, let's spice it up. Push-ups. 20. Clean form. Ready? Go." The group dropped down again. Arms bent, bodies trembled. Some struggled by the 5th rep, pausing on their knees before forcing themselves onward. Ryan pumped out his own set with showy bursts of energy, then flicked his gaze sideways. Samuel moved with a rhythm so precise it was almost unsettling. Each push-up was controlled, smooth and deliberate. Down, up, down, up. His breathing matched each movement, calm and measured. 15 came and went. 20 arrived without hesitation. He didn't stop there. He simply continued, body still aligned, shoulders steady. 25, 30, until Ryan barked, "That's enough," more sharply than he intended. The laughter was gone now. The room was quieter, filled instead with the sharp sound of heavy breathing and the soft squeak of Samuel's palms against the mat. He stood again, dusting his hands. His eyes weren't boastful, nor mocking. They were focused, disciplined, almost distant. A subtle discomfort stirred among the clients. The challenge, once amusing, now carried weight. This wasn't a janitor fumbling through a trainer's routine. This was something else, a glimpse of skill, of experience, of a life not defined by the mop he had set aside. Ryan's jaw tightened. He forced a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. He felt his own pride bristle, the heat of competition rising. He couldn't back down, not in front of his clients, not when the spotlight he had created was now slipping away from him. "Okay," Ryan said, clapping his hands louder than before, summoning back the energy. "Let's see who can handle burpees. Fast, explosive, 10 in a row. Go." The group groaned but obeyed, bodies dropping to the floor, springing up, then down again. Ryan launched into his own set with loud exhalations, determined to outpace the janitor. But from the corner of his eye, he saw Samuel again. Not rushing, not flailing, but moving with a fluidity that came from muscle memory. Down, out, in, jump. Each motion crisp, efficient, exact. By the time Ryan finished, panting harder than he'd admit, Samuel landed softly on his feet, shoulders squared, breathing steady. And in that moment, the gym wasn't laughing anymore. It was watching. The energy in the gym had shifted completely. What began as a joke was unraveling into something far heavier, and no one could quite say when it happened. The chuckles had died away, replaced by furtive glances, strained breaths, and a silence that pressed against the walls. Samuel stood calmly at the center of it all. His uniform shirt clung to his back with a faint sheen of sweat, yet his breathing remained controlled, his body language unshaken. The mop in the corner seemed a distant memory now. Here, on the mat, he was something else, someone else. Ryan clapped his hands again, louder this time, his voice straining to inject enthusiasm. All right, time for circuits, squats, burpees, push-ups, mountain climbers, 1 minute each, no breaks. Let's go. It was the kind of drill designed to leave even seasoned athletes trembling. His clients groaned but dropped into position, obeying. Ryan dove in too, determined to set a punishing pace, determined to remind everyone who led this floor. But as the circuit began, all eyes drifted. Not toward Ryan, but toward Samuel. The janitor's squats were deep, precise, his heels planted firmly, his spine aligned perfectly. He rose and fell with steady rhythm, as if his body had been conditioned for this very moment. When he dropped into burpees, the fluidity of his movement startled even those too exhausted to care. There was no wasted energy, no clumsy struggle. Just efficient strength. Push up, jump, land. Again. Again. Within 30 seconds, some of the clients faltered. Their arms trembled, their legs burned. A few collapsed onto the mat, gasping, sweat dripping from their brows. Ryan's voice rose higher, straining to keep them moving. His own pace stuttered, breath coming sharper, faster. But Samuel? His breathing remained even, measured like a drumbeat. His movements were as sharp at the end of the set as they were at the beginning. By the time Ryan barked, "Switch!" many of the clients had already slowed to a crawl. They lay on their mats, clutching their knees, desperate for air. But Samuel dropped into push-ups without hesitation, his form immaculate, his body moving with mechanical precision. The silence in the gym grew deeper. Only the sound of Samuel's steady breathing and the faint slap of his palms against the mat filled the room. Some clients stopped pretending to exercise altogether, simply sitting back, watching him. They had never seen a man work like this. Ryan, red-faced now, strained to keep up. His arms shook, his shoulders ached, and the sound of his own ragged breathing betrayed him. He stole a glance toward Samuel, and felt a jolt of something unexpected. Fear. Because Samuel wasn't just keeping up, he was outpacing him. Outpacing everyone. By the final minute of mountain climbers, Ryan was gritting his teeth, his face drenched in sweat. His clients were sprawled across the mats, some whispering in disbelief, others too tired to speak. And Samuel moved like time itself, bent differently for him. His knees drove forward with speed and precision, his back straight, his gaze locked forward as though nothing else in the world existed. When the whistle of Ryan's stopwatch finally cut through the room, the sound of relief was immediate. Bodies collapsed, gasps filled the air. People clutched water bottles like lifelines, their muscles screaming in surrender. But Samuel? Samuel stood. Slowly, calmly, he rose to his feet, his chest rising and falling in a controlled rhythm. He reached for the towel Ryan had tossed earlier, wiped his brow and then folded it neatly before setting it aside. Not a word escaped him. Not a boast, not a laugh. Just silence. And that silence spoke louder than anything else in the room. For the first time since Titanium Fitness had opened its glossy doors, the hierarchy inside these mirrored walls cracked. Clients who had once overlooked Samuel now stared at him, wide-eyed, as though seeing him for the first time. The janitor who mopped their floors had just revealed a strength greater than the trainer they paid to lead them. Ryan swallowed hard, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. His throat felt dry, his chest still heaving. For the first time in his career, he realized the spotlight had slipped from him, and it wasn't coming back easily. The gym was quieter than it had ever been. The heavy thud of weights, the chatter from the smoothie bar, even the hum of the treadmills seemed to fade into the background. All that remained was the echo of breath, ragged from Ryan and his clients, steady from Samuel. Ryan pulled himself upright, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temples. He tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin, brittle. The smile on his face was more mask than expression, and everyone in the room could see it. For the first time, the trainer, the man they looked to for strength and discipline, seemed smaller. Samuel, meanwhile, stood with an ease that belonged not to a janitor, but to someone shaped by years of rigor. His eyes swept briefly across the room, catching the stares, the disbelief, the flickers of respect. But he didn't bask in it. He didn't need to. Ryan finally broke the silence. "Man, how did you—" His voice cracked with exhaustion, and he stopped, swallowed hard, then tried again. "How'd you do that?" For a long moment, Samuel said nothing. He walked calmly to where his jacket rested against the wall, lifted it and folded it over his arm. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as though words required weight before they were spoken. When he finally turned back, his voice was low, steady, but it carried. "Discipline," he said. "That's all." Some clients tilted their heads, waiting for more. Ryan stood frozen, towel clutched in his hand, his chest still rising and falling. Samuel exhaled, a slow breath that seemed to carry memories in it. His gaze wasn't fixed on Ryan or the group, but somewhere beyond the mirrored walls, back in time, into a place only he knew. "I was a Marine," he said finally. The words landed like stones in the room, heavy and unmoving. For years, discipline wasn't a choice. It was survival. We woke before the sun, we trained till our bodies broke, and then we trained again. Pain was part of the air we breathed. You didn't complain. You endured. You adapted. A murmur rippled faintly through the room. Some of the clients glanced at each other, startled, as if struggling to reconcile the man before them with the uniform he once wore. Samuel's eyes dropped briefly to his hands. Calloused, strong, scarred in small ways invisible until this moment. He flexed them once before continuing. "After the Corps, I boxed. Semi-pro. Never made the big stage, but the fight taught me the same thing the Marines did. That strength isn't about the body. It's about the mind. About getting up when everything in you wants to stay down." Ryan's forced grin had long since faded. He stood still, towel forgotten, listening. The trainer who had mocked, who had called out the janitor as a punchline, now found himself the student in his own gym. Samuel adjusted the jacket in his arm. His voice softened, almost reflective. "Life doesn't always keep you where you were. Things change, choices, circumstances, responsibilities. I clean these floors because it pays the bills. But that doesn't define me. This?" He gestured briefly toward his chest, his steady breath, his calm frame. "This discipline, this strength, this dignity, that's who I am. That's who I'll always be." The words settled over the room like a blanket, not fiery, not boastful, but firm. They carried a truth no one could dismiss. The clients shifted uncomfortably, their earlier laughter now replaced with something more complex. Respect, guilt, admiration. They had watched him as background, a shadow at the edges of their world. Now, suddenly, he was undeniable. Ryan swallowed again, his throat dry. His pride stung, but beneath it, a strange warmth spread. Something he hadn't expected to feel. Humbled. Inspired. A door had opened in front of him, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the strongest man in the room. Samuel slipped his arms back into his jacket, the faint squeak of the zipper echoing in the silence. He didn't linger, didn't gloat. He simply nodded once, a gesture of respect, and turned to return to the mop resting quietly in the corner. And in that quiet, the truth had been spoken. The janitor wasn't just the janitor. He was a Marine, a fighter, A man whose strength went deeper than the muscles his trainer flaunted, and everyone knew it now. The following morning, Titanium Fitness felt different. The same marble floors gleamed, the same scent of eucalyptus hung in the air, and the same playlist of high-energy beats pulsed through the speakers. Yet, beneath the familiar shine, there was a new weight. Word had spread. What happened the day before, the janitor outpacing clients, humbling the trainer, revealing himself as a Marine and boxer, had traveled faster than any marketing campaign. Members who hadn't been in the room whispered about it in the locker rooms, at the juice bar, by the treadmills. "Did you hear about Sam?" they asked. And the answers came back like folklore. The man who mopped floors had wiped the floor with everyone else. Samuel arrived as he always did, early, quiet, his work uniform pressed, mop bucket squeaking gently across the tiles. He didn't stride in with pride, didn't carry himself as though the gym now belonged to him. He simply worked, the same way he always had. But people noticed him differently. One client, a stockbroker who usually barked into his Bluetooth while lifting weights, paused mid-conversation to give Samuel a respectful nod. Another, a young actress who had giggled the day before, walked over shyly and asked if he had a favorite stretch for sore quads. Others whispered, then fell silent when he passed, their eyes following him, not with dismissal anymore, but with a quiet curiosity. Ryan felt it most of all. He had barely slept. The image of Samuel moving with calm precision, his own breath faltering beside him, had replayed in his mind over and over. Pride had been his fuel for years, and Samuel had cut through it in minutes, not with arrogance, but with truth. The humiliation stung, but beneath it was something else, something Ryan couldn't ignore: respect. When his boot camp class gathered again, Ryan's voice lacked the cocky edge it once carried. He was still energetic, still demanding, but there was humility threaded through his commands. And when Samuel entered, pushing his mop quietly across the far corner, Ryan felt his chest tighten. This time, he didn't look past him. Halfway through warm-ups, Ryan called for a pause. His clients looked at him expectantly, sweat already forming on their brows. Ryan turned towards Samuel, and for the first time, his words carried no smirk. "Sam," he said, voice steady but humble, "would you lead us through the stretches?" The room froze. Clients exchanged wide-eyed looks. Ryan, the trainer who thrived on being the strongest, the fastest, the center, had just handed the floor to the janitor. Samuel's mop rested against the wall. He stood still for a moment, the silence pressing in. Then he nodded once. Calmly, he stepped forward, his posture as steady as the day before. He didn't bark commands. He didn't show off. He guided them, simple, clear instructions. He demonstrated stretches with precision, correcting form with a light touch, explaining how to feel the pull in the right muscles. His voice was low, calm, certain, the voice of someone who had lived discipline, not just taught it. The clients followed, some tentative at first, then fully engaged. They mirrored his movements, their earlier skepticism dissolving with each moment. Even Ryan moved beside them, his eyes fixed on Samuel, listening carefully, absorbing. By the end, the room was silent again, but it wasn't the uneasy silence of disbelief. It was reverence. Ryan stepped forward, his face flushed not just from exercise, but from something deeper. He exhaled slowly and spoke loud enough for the group to hear. "Yesterday, I mocked you, Sam. I made you a joke. But today, I want to apologize. Not just to you, but to everyone who watched me do it. I thought strength was about image, but you showed us it's about something more, and I respect that. I respect you." The room felt heavier with his words, but also lighter, freed of something unspoken. The clients looked at Samuel, waiting for his response. Samuel simply gave a small nod. "Respect isn't given," he said quietly. "It's earned. By all of us." He picked up his mop again, returning to his work as though nothing had changed. But everything had. From that day forward, Samuel wasn't just the man who cleaned the gym. He was the man who reminded them all, trainer and clients alike, that dignity and discipline had no uniform. Weeks passed, and the gym was no longer the same place it had been before that morning. Titanium Fitness still gleamed with its marble floors, its mirrors still reflected sweat-slicked ambition, and the air still pulsed with upbeat playlists. But beneath the polish, something had shifted. A new kind of energy filled the space. It wasn't about showing off, about who had the most expensive shoes or the leanest physique. It was quieter, steadier. It was discipline. And at the center of that change was Samuel Green. It began small. Clients who once dismissed him started greeting him when they walked in. Not with passing nods, but with genuine respect. Some lingered to ask him about form, about breathing, about routines. He answered softly, never flaunting, always precise. His advice was simple, but it carried weight because it came from a man who had lived it, not one who just taught it. Ryan himself changed most of all. The swagger that once defined his classes gave way to something deeper. He still pushed his clients hard, still filled the room with energy, but there was humility in his voice now. He no longer needed to be the loudest man in the gym, because he had learned that strength could also be silent. One morning, after weeks of watching Samuel quietly inspire clients, Ryan pulled him aside. They stood by the mirrored wall, the sun pouring through the glass, catching the dust in golden streaks. Ryan's voice was steady but reverent. "Sam," he said, "I want you to be part of this. Not as staff, as a teacher, as a leader." Samuel frowned slightly, as though unsure what Ryan meant. His mop leaned against the wall, a quiet witness to the life he had carried for so long. Ryan smiled, genuine this time, without a trace of bravado. "We're starting a new class. It's yours. Your training, your way. Discipline the way you live it. I want people to learn not just to sweat, but to endure. We're calling it Green's Grit." For the first time, Samuel's composure wavered. His brow furrowed, his lips pressed together, his eyes softened. He had never asked for recognition, never sought a spotlight. He had been content to mop floors, to live his life with quiet dignity. But here was an invitation to share that dignity, to transform others with it. He didn't answer right away. He looked around the room, at the clients stretching, at Ryan watching him with unguarded respect, at the polished mirrors that had reflected so many stories of vanity. And then, slowly, he nodded. The first Green's Grit class was unlike anything Titanium Fitness had ever seen. There was no booming playlist, no theatrics, just Samuel's calm voice, guiding them through routines that looked simple, but demanded discipline. Marines drills, boxers conditioning, movements honed not in luxury, but in life. The clients sweated, stumbled, strained, and came back the next day asking for more. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. Ryan stood at the edge of the class, watching with quiet pride. He no longer needed to lead every moment. In fact, he realized he was learning more than he was teaching. And as Samuel led them, not with bravado, but with quiet strength, a new culture took root inside Titanium Fitness. A culture that understood greatness could wear plain clothes, that resilience could live behind a mop bucket, that dignity didn't need to shout to be heard. Samuel Green hadn't just accepted a challenge that day. He had left behind a legacy. Because in the end, strength wasn't in the muscles or the spotlight. It was in the discipline of a man who refused to be defined by his job, who carried his past with pride, and who taught everyone around him that resilience often hides in plain sight, even behind a mop.